Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm with you because of the kids. I have no desire for you. Those words didn't just hit me, they hollowed me out from the inside. She said them so casually, like she was ordering coffee, standing there in our kitchen with the fridge humming behind her and her face lit by the pale glow of her phone. Her name is Rachel. We've been married 12 years. 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, the picture-perfect life that looks stable from the outside. But that sentence burned it all down in seconds. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask her what she meant. I just stood there, watching her scroll, that faint smirk curling at her lips like she had finally said something she had been waiting to unload for years. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed still. That was the last time she would ever see me desperate. That night, I lay in bed next to her. She was facing the wall, her phone lighting up the sheets as her fingers kept scrolling. The distance between us felt like an ocean, and for the first time, I didn't want to swim across it. I stared at the ceiling, not with panic, but with clarity. Every laugh she stopped giving me. Every touch she withdrew. Every excuse. It all came crashing into focus. She hadn't slipped away recently. She'd left me years ago. She just finally said it out loud. The next morning, I moved differently. Not dramatically, just quietly. I didn't make her coffee like I always did. I didn't ask if she needed gas in her car. I didn't check the weather for her or leave a reminder note on the counter. Instead, I left the house before she even woke up. Sat in my car with the engine off, just breathing, like it was the first real breath I'd taken in years. At work, I pulled up our bank accounts. For years, Rachel never bothered with the bills. That was my territory. Mortgage, utilities, savings, investments. I kept it all running while she lived like it was automatic. That day, I opened a new account under my name only. Rerouted a portion of my salary. No announcement, no conversation. Just the first step in building a life she wouldn't recognize. When I got home that night, she was on the couch with a glass of wine, wearing one of those satin robes she hadn't touched in months. Her hair was curled, a movie paused on the screen. She looked at me and said, "You're late." Her tone wasn't curious. It was sharp, like she wanted me to explain myself. For the first time, I didn't. I just dropped my keys on the counter and replied, "Didn't realize I had a curfew." Her eyes flicked up, confused, maybe even rattled, like she wasn't expecting resistance. I cleaned up the mess she left in the kitchen, takeout boxes, empty bottles, without a word. No sighs, no tension, just silence. She asked if I was okay. I told her, better than I've been in a long time. That answer unsettled her more than any argument could. That was the beginning. She thought she had control by telling me she stayed only for the kids. She thought I'd crumble under the weight of her rejection. But what she didn't know was that her words had freed me. She just didn't see yet how fast I was slipping out of her grasp. And as I watched her that night, sipping her wine like a queen on her throne, I realized something chilling. She had no idea the game had already flipped. The days that followed didn't explode into arguments. They withered in silence, the kind that doesn't need raised voices because it already says everything. I stopped doing the small things that once defined me as a husband. No more texts during the day to check on her. No more surprise coffee runs. No more effort. It was strange how easy it was to let go once the switch flipped inside me. For years, I thought holding on made me strong. But real strength was in the release. Rachel didn't notice at first. She floated through her routines with that air of superiority she carried lately, like she was above the grind of marriage. But small cracks began to show. One night, she asked if I wanted to watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. I told her I'd already started watching one earlier. I didn't pause it, didn't shift on the couch to make space. She sat at the far end, sipping her wine, awkward and restless, as if she suddenly realized the script had changed and she didn't know her lines anymore. The next morning, she asked if I was okay. Her voice wasn't concerned, it was cautious, like she sensed the shift but didn't want to admit it. I looked at her, smiled, and said, "Why wouldn't I be?" That smile wasn't warm. It was controlled, deliberate. She blinked, waiting for me to elaborate, but I just grabbed my keys and walked out. Let her stew in the silence she had crafted for years. By the second week, my detachment had a rhythm. I went to the gym after work instead of rushing home. I ate dinner alone, sometimes in my car, sometimes at a diner. I started buying clothes that fit better, grooming myself in ways I hadn't bothered with in years. I wasn't reinventing myself for her approval. I was reclaiming the version of me she had buried under years of neglect. Rachel began to notice. One evening, I walked in later than usual. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, asking where I had been. I shrugged and said, "Out." She pressed, asking with who. My answer was simple. People. The look on her face told me everything. She didn't like the ambiguity, the possibility that my world might be expanding without her. For years, she believed I revolved around her. Now, she was watching the orbit break. That night, she lingered near me, waiting for me to engage, to ask about her day, to make her feel relevant again. I didn't. I read a book in silence, the lamp casting a warm glow over pages she wasn't part of. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger, not control, but fear. And that's when I knew. She was finally beginning to taste the emptiness she had fed me for years. By the third week, the silence had grown teeth. It wasn't just absence anymore, it was pressure. Rachel started breaking her own patterns, small signs that the ground beneath her was shifting. She put on lipstick before I came home, something she hadn't done in a long time. She set the table one night with candles and made pasta from scratch, as if resurrecting some memory of who she used to be. I sat across from her, ate slowly, thanked her politely, but offered nothing more. When her hand brushed mine across the table, I pulled back, not with drama, but like it barely registered. She froze, that flicker in her eyes again, this time sharper, like panic disguised as patience. The next day, she sent texts she hadn't sent in years. A casual, "Hope your morning's going okay." A forced "Miss you." I replied with precision, 3 words at most. "All good. Thanks. Doesn't matter." Each answer was a scalpel, slicing through her attempt to reel me back. She used to think she could ration affection like currency, giving me scraps when it suited her. Now she was discovering how it felt when the account was closed. One night, I got home later than usual. She was dressed up, makeup sharp, heels abandoned by the door. She asked if I wanted to go to a new restaurant, her voice almost too bright, rehearsed. I said I'd already eaten. The disappointment in her posture was quick, but unmistakable. She masked it by pouring herself another glass of wine, but her silence was louder than her words. That weekend, I made another move. I started adjusting finances. Closed subscriptions she never noticed I paid for. Rerouted more of my paycheck into the private account. It wasn't revenge, it was survival. For years, she told herself she was independent, but the truth was she never carried the weight of what I handled. Soon, she'd feel the absence, and there'd be no one to blame but herself. Sunday night, she lingered at the bedroom door, watching me fold my own laundry. Her voice cracked slightly when she asked if everything was okay. I looked at her, calm, collected, and told her, "Better than you think." Then I turned off the light and went to sleep without another word. That was the moment I saw it, the first fracture in her confidence. She was starting to understand this wasn't temporary. I wasn't sulking. I wasn't waiting. I was already walking away, quietly, piece by piece. And the silence that once belonged to her was now entirely mine. Her desperation began quietly. She didn't throw tantrums or start fights. She tried to resurrect a version of herself that no longer existed. She lingered near me more often, asking if I wanted to go out, suggesting we try cooking together like we used to. I stayed polite, calm, but unmoved. The more indifferent I became, the more restless she grew. It was like she was looking at a stranger living in her house, someone who no longer needed her. And that terrified her. One evening, I came home later than usual. She was sitting in the living room wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years, hair curled, makeup perfect. She asked if I wanted to sit and have a drink. 2 glasses of wine were already waiting on the table, one untouched. I looked at the glass, then at her, and told her I was heading to bed. Her face faltered for a second before she tried to hide it. I left her sitting there alone, with 2 glasses of wine and silence that weighed heavier than any argument. The following morning, I noticed her studying me, not with affection, but with calculation, like she was trying to understand how the balance of power had shifted. She asked if I was seeing someone else. I simply smiled and said, "You'll figure it out." That answer lingered in the air like smoke, choking her more than any confession would have. She didn't realize that sometimes the worst punishment is ambiguity. At work, I continued making quiet moves. I changed passwords, moved assets, adjusted plans for the future. I wasn't just preparing to leave. I was ensuring that when I did, there would be no return, no way for her to claw back control. I wasn't just drifting away emotionally. I was dismantling the life she thought was hers to control. That weekend, her sister stopped by. I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Her sister asked if everything was okay. Rachel's voice was strained as she told her I'd been distant, cold, different. She painted herself as the victim. But her sister's tone carried doubt, maybe even judgment. For once, Rachel wasn't getting the sympathy she expected. I stayed upstairs, listening, realizing she was beginning to lose the narrative. Later that night, she came into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and asked if I wanted to talk. I didn't even look up from the book I was reading. I told her there was nothing left to talk about. She stared at me in silence, waiting for me to crack, to plead, to fight. I didn't. Eventually, she left the room without a word. And as the door closed, I felt the power shift completely. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one chasing. She was. And she was already losing. By the fourth week, Rachel's mask had begun to slip. The woman who once looked at me with indifference now looked at me with unease. She hovered around me like a shadow, searching for cracks in my silence, hoping I would break the way I used to. But this time, I gave her nothing. One evening, I found her in the kitchen scrubbing the counters like she was trying to erase something invisible. Her movements were frantic, her eyes darting toward me as I walked past. She asked if I wanted to have dinner together, her voice too casual to be genuine. I told her I wasn't hungry. She froze for a moment, then muttered something under her breath. I didn't bother asking what it was. Her words no longer mattered. The next day, she texted me in the middle of work. A picture of the kids, smiling, eating ice cream. Underneath, she wrote, "We need to be a family again." It wasn't affection. It was desperation. She was no longer appealing to me as her husband. She was clinging to me as her safety net. I didn't respond right away. Hours passed before I sent a single line. "The kids will be fine." That night, she was waiting when I came home. She stood in the hallway, arms folded, trying to look composed but failing. She asked directly if I was leaving her. I looked at her calmly and said, "You'll know when it happens." The silence after that answer felt like a blade pressed against her skin. She blinked, her confidence crumbling, but I walked past her without another word. Later, I lay in bed listening to her pace the house. Drawers opened and closed, the sound of glass clinking in the kitchen, her voice low and shaky as she spoke on the phone to someone, probably her mother or one of her friends. I caught fragments. Words like distant, different, cold. But what struck me most was the tremor in her voice. She wasn't telling them the truth. She wasn't admitting she had pushed me too far. She was afraid of the version of me she no longer recognized. By the time she finally came to bed, I was already pretending to be asleep. She lay down carefully, as if not to disturb me. For years, she had rolled over without care, her back turned to me like I wasn't even there. But now she was cautious, fragile. The roles had reversed. And in that silence, I realized she was no longer the one leaving me. She was the one waiting for me to decide when I'd disappear for good. The shift became undeniable the morning she tried to cook breakfast. Rachel hadn't bothered in months, maybe years, but there she was at the stove, fumbling with pancakes while the smell of burnt batter filled the kitchen. She glanced at me as I walked in, forcing a smile, asking if I wanted some. I poured my coffee, said nothing, and walked out to the patio. She stood there holding a spatula like it was a lifeline, but I didn't look back. That silence was louder than any rejection I could have spoken. Later that week, I caught her rifling through my gym bag. She pretended she was folding laundry, but I saw her checking receipts, scanning for clues. I didn't call her out. I let her wonder. Let her sit with the unease of not knowing where I'd been, who I'd been talking to, or why I was coming home later and later. She used to thrive on control, rationing affection like power. Now she was drowning in the same uncertainty she once fed me. One night, she cracked. She sat across from me at the dining table, her wine untouched, her hands trembling just slightly. She said she felt like I wasn't here anymore, like I was slipping away. I kept eating, silent, steady, until she finally asked if I still loved her. I set my fork down, looked her in the eye, and said, "You'll figure that out too." Then I stood up and left her at the table. That was the night she cried. Not loudly, not theatrically. Quiet, muffled sobs through the bedroom wall. For years, she had starved me of intimacy, dismissing me with cold indifference. Now she was the one curled up in the dark, begging for the smallest scrap of connection. But I gave her nothing. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. The next morning, she tried to mask the damage. She dressed up for work, full makeup, perfume heavy in the air. She lingered near me, waiting for a compliment, a glance, something. I sipped my coffee and scrolled through my phone. She left without a word, slamming the door harder than she meant to. I didn't flinch. I realized then that I wasn't just leaving her. I was dismantling the version of myself she depended on. The husband who forgave, who waited, who begged. That man was gone. And in his place was someone she couldn't read, couldn't predict, couldn't control. And deep down, I think she knew the truth. She had killed the marriage long ago. I was just the one writing the obituary. By the 5th week, the silence between us had grown into something she couldn't ignore anymore. Rachel started circling me like a ghost in her own house. She lingered at doorways, hovering as if she wanted to say something but couldn't form the words. Every time I caught her watching me, she looked away too quickly, as if ashamed of her own fear. For years she had kept me starved, acting like affection was a favor, intimacy a transaction. Now the roles were reversed, and she was beginning to taste the emptiness she once fed me. One evening, I came home later than usual. The kids were already asleep, the house too quiet. She was in the living room, candles lit, music playing softly from her phone. She was dressed up again, makeup carefully done, like she had spent hours preparing for an audience that never showed. She asked if I wanted to sit, maybe talk. I told her I had things to do upstairs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I just left her sitting there with her wine glass and her unspoken desperation. That night, she slipped into bed beside me carefully, almost timidly. For years, she had rolled over without a thought, her back turned like I didn't exist. Now she inched closer, her hand brushing against mine under the sheets. I stayed still. I let her hand linger in the space between us, then pulled mine away slowly, deliberately. She turned over without a word, but I heard the sharp inhale, the silent sting of rejection. The next morning, she tried another approach. She made small talk at breakfast, asked about work, even asked if I wanted to do something together over the weekend. I sipped my coffee and told her I already had plans. Her smile faltered, her eyes darted down, but she forced a nod like she understood. Later that day, I received a text from her while I was at work. Just 5 words. Are you leaving me? I stared at it for a long time before replying. You'll know when it happens. I didn't wait for her answer. I turned my phone face down and got back to work. When I came home that night, she was waiting again, pacing the hallway, tension written all over her face. She wanted a fight, some explosion that would prove I still cared enough to argue. But I gave her the same thing I had given her for weeks: silence, distance, calm detachment. And as she stood there, trembling with words she couldn't force out, I realized something important. The woman who once told me she stayed only for the kids was now the one begging, silently, for me to stay. But I had already decided. She just didn't know how final that decision really was. By the 6th week, the cracks were no longer subtle. Rachel was unraveling, and she didn't even bother hiding it. I came home one evening to find her sitting at the dining table with her laptop open, pretending to work. But the way her eyes kept flicking toward the door told me she was waiting. Waiting for me. When I walked past her without stopping, she shut the laptop quickly, like she'd been caught. She asked how my day was. I said it was fine, and kept moving. Her voice followed me down the hall, but I didn't turn around. The kids began to notice too. At dinner, they asked why Mom was so quiet. Rachel forced a smile, saying she was just tired. But I could see the way her fork scraped against her plate, her appetite gone. For years, she dismissed me in front of them, rolling her eyes at my words, brushing off my presence. Now she was the one being ignored, and she felt the sting of invisibility in front of the people who mattered most. That weekend, she tried again. She suggested a family outing, something simple, like going to the park or grabbing ice cream together. I agreed for the kids' sake, but not for her. I walked beside them, carried the bags, laughed with my son and daughter. Rachel trailed behind, quiet, excluded from a bond she once claimed she was preserving by staying with me. She looked like an outsider in her own family, and I let her feel every ounce of it. When we got home, she cornered me in the kitchen. She asked if I hated her. I told her I didn't. Hatred takes energy. What I felt was nothing. Her face tightened. Her lips parted like she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She just stood there, shaking her head as if she couldn't process the indifference. That silence cut deeper than any cruel word ever could. Later that night, she tried one last move. She slipped into bed without her usual robe, something she hadn't done in years. It was a performance, one she thought might pull me back. I didn't even glance at her. I rolled over, facing the opposite wall, and fell asleep without hesitation. She lay there in the dark, breathing uneven, realizing her final card had no power anymore. And as I drifted off, I understood the full scope of what had happened. She had once told me she stayed only for the kids, that she had no desire for me. Now she was the one clinging, desperate, invisible in the silence she created. The truth was clear. I wasn't just leaving her. She had already lost me. By the 7th week, my silence had become its own weapon, and Rachel was unraveling faster than I expected. She no longer pretended everything was fine. Instead, she lingered in rooms she used to avoid, waiting for me to say something, anything, that would give her a foothold. I gave her nothing. Each word I withheld cut deeper than any argument we could have had. One night, I found her sitting in the darkened living room. No wine, no robe, no performance. Just her, staring at the wall like she was trapped inside her own head. She looked up when I passed by, eyes red, but I didn't stop. I went upstairs, closed the door, and left her with the silence she once weaponized against me. Only now, it was her prison. The financial shifts I had put in motion began to ripple. Subscriptions canceled. Cards declined. Bills she never realized I paid suddenly waiting on the counter. She asked me why things were changing, her voice shaky, almost pleading. I told her calmly that I was preparing for the future. That was all. Her face went pale, like she understood the implication but couldn't bring herself to confront it directly. By then, even her friends had started to notice. I overheard her on the phone one evening, whispering to someone that she thought I was planning to leave. Her voice cracked as she insisted she still had control, still had time. But her tone betrayed her. She knew she had lost me. She just didn't know when I would finally walk away. The kids, innocent as they were, kept asking why Mom seemed sad all the time. I told them she was just tired, and then I changed the subject. I poured my energy into them, playing games, helping with homework, making sure they felt seen. Rachel watched from a distance, excluded from the connection she once claimed she was sacrificing for. The irony was brutal. She had stayed, she said, for the kids. Now the kids barely noticed her, because she had made herself irrelevant long before I ever did. That weekend, she tried a final act of control. She asked if we could talk, just the two of us, away from the kids. I agreed, but when she started speaking, all I heard was fear. She said she wanted to try again, rebuild, find what we lost. I looked at her and said, "What we lost doesn't exist anymore." Her lips trembled, tears gathering in her eyes, but I stood up, walked past her, and left her sitting there with the echo of her own failure. And in that moment, I realized she finally understood. The man she thought would never leave had already left her a long time ago. The final moment didn't come with shouting, accusations, or slammed doors. It came with stillness. By the 8th week, I had already made every move necessary. New accounts, legal consultations, documents ready. Rachel sensed it, but didn't know how close the end really was. She tried to pull me back with tears, with apologies whispered too late, with gestures that once might have mattered. None of it reached me. The silence between us had become permanent, and there was no path back. One evening, after the kids were asleep, she sat across from me at the dining table. No makeup, no wine, no performance. Just her, stripped of the confidence she once carried like armor. She said she didn't want to lose me, that she had been selfish, that she thought I would always be there no matter how much she pushed me away. Her voice cracked on every sentence, but my face stayed still. When she finally asked what I was thinking, I told her the truth. I already left. You just didn't notice. Her eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks, but I didn't soften. I stood, grabbed the envelope from the side table, and placed it in front of her. Divorce papers, signed on my end, waiting only for her name. She stared at them like they were a weapon, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. She whispered that she couldn't believe I had planned this. I told her calmly that she had planned it for me the moment she said she stayed only for the kids. That night, I packed a small bag and left. No yelling, no final fight, no long explanation. Just silence. I checked into a small apartment I had arranged weeks before, one she never knew about. When I lay down in that bed, the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was freedom. The next day, she called me 23 times. Texted me paragraphs filled with regret, anger, pleading. I didn't reply. I blocked her number and every social media account. For the first time in years, she was alone with herself, forced to face the consequences of her words without me to absorb the impact. And me? I walked away lighter than I had ever been. Not broken, not bitter, free. She thought she had bound me to her by claiming I was only there for the kids. But the truth was, I left not just her. I left the version of myself that tolerated being unwanted. In the end, she was right about one thing. She had no desire for me. And now, I had no presence for her. She wanted a husband she could treat like a placeholder. Instead, she got silence. The kind that ends everything. And that was the last gift I gave her. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.